So, good Friday morning, everyone. Whether you're with me live, as you all are, or watching this recorded, I'm glad to be spending time with you. And if you are here, you and I probably share this common interest in learning about stuff, particularly about the living stuff that's in our backyards, stuff we see on a daily basis, like the oak tree or the sparrow, stuff we don't see regularly, but we could if we looked under things like the spittlebugs or the roly-polies, and stuff that we don't see much because they're out at night, like possums, or because you need a microscope to see them, like bacteria. But all of these things that we've been talking about are major forces in our backyards, and learning about them helps us better understand them, and that helps us better understand and appreciate the green spaces that are most familiar to us and most accessible to us, which are our backyards. So we're kicking off season 2 with an episode called Full Yellow Jacket. If you're confused at the differences between a wasp, a yellow jacket, and a hornet, we'll try to sort through these terms and then ask the really crucial questions like, why do their stings hurt so much? And why are they so attracted to my tuna sandwich, those flying jerks? And a quick aside related to this slide and copyright issues, of course, I came up with the title Full Yellow Jacket and then Google image searched and found out that Full Yellow Jacket is also the title of a short film on YouTube that you can watch for free. I haven't actually watched it, so I can't say anything about it, but I was able to shamelessly borrow the image off the internet to take advantage of someone else's design work for this cover slide while I carefully and seamlessly photoshopped in some new images. Incidentally, Full Yellow Jacket is also the name of a song by musician Jim Clayton, who's been on Saturday Night Live and SCTV. I know we have some SCTV fans here. It's also a quest in a My Little Pony video game. Chad probably played this, called Legends of Equestria, and a type of mead produced by Superstition Meadery. But before we get into all things yellow and black that sting me, I'd like to say a word about our sponsor, so to speak, UEC in My Backyard. I encourage you to visit this website if you haven't. There's activities, videos, and all kinds of resources about exploring your backyard with content for all ages. And I'll draw your attention this week to a fantastic video that was one of the final submissions by our incredible science communication intern, Elizabeth Gamillo, about plant pressing, which is a great way to document, study, and preserve your backyard diversity for posterity. We will sorely miss Elizabeth's amazing talents and wish her all the best. And I'm really excited to introduce the Urban Ecology Center's first ever fall backyard birding blitz. Almost every bird-related festival, challenge, or event takes place in the spring. But as Ethan has mentioned, we've got just as many birds migrating through in the fall, actually a lot more birds in the fall on account of a lot of them being born last spring. So we're going to do a fall version of our backyard birding blitz that some of you participated in already in the spring. And just like the first one, we're going to collectively see how many birds we can find in our backyards and surrounding areas. And there's 2 lectures leading up to the blitz. Next Friday morning during this 9 a.m. time slot, my talk will not focus on a species of backyard wildlife, but I'll be talking about the amazing structure we know of as a feather. We'll ask the question, what is a feather? And we'll also look at the incredible adaptations that birds use feathers for, because if it has a feather and it's alive today, it's a bird. But I'm even more excited to tell you that next Thursday at 6 p.m., we have a very special guest, Chuck Hagner, author of several books and the former editor of Birdwatching magazine, who will be talking about the birds of Wisconsin and his new book, The Field Guide to Birds of Wisconsin. So lots of great bird-related events next week as we reach peak fall migration. And just like a blockbuster movie with lots of trailers, before we get to the featured critter, I do have one retraction I think it's important to make from an episode from season 1. So in the episode, All Coyote on the Western Front, I showed this slide that looked at human migration from their evolutionary cradle in Africa. And I mentioned that about 13,000 years ago, the group that we call the Clovis people took advantage of low sea levels at the end of an ice age that opened up a land bridge across the Bering Strait. And then from that group, all of the American cultures arose: the Aztecs, the Olmecs, the Maya, the Woodland Indians, the Mississippian culture. That's the story that's told in all of our history books. But But it's important to point out that much of the new evidence in both archaeology and anthropology support the idea that humans may have arrived in the Americas as early as 50,000 years ago. So way earlier than was previously or has been said, which is about the same time that humans arrived in Australia. And while it's likely that a group did cross the Bering Strait at that time, there were likely several immigrations over tens of thousands of years arriving by land and by boat, resulting in civilizations that equaled and sometimes exceeded the knowledge of the great empires we learn about in the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. So I think this is a good reminder of the colonial influence in our textbooks and what we tend to repeat as the letter of the law, because that's how we all learned it. So if you're up for a really good read, you should pick up a book called 1491 by Charles Mann that was recommended to me by Robin. Thank you. It's just really important for all of us to kind of relearn the history. So here is the mighty yellow jacket. It strikes fear in a lot of creatures, including humans. It's often vilified and maligned, but I'm here to show you the yellow jacket for what it is. Not a jerk, not a villain, not a hero, just another species adapted to living around humans, and one that has a huge positive impact on ecological and agricultural communities. So to start with, what is a yellow jacket? How can we know to point at something and say, that's a yellow jacket? Not a hornet, not a mud dauber, not a wasp, not a bee, but it's a yellow jacket. So let's start at a slightly higher level, first of all. A yellow jacket is among the insects in the order Hymenoptera. And if you want to go back and find out what makes something an insect, you can go back and watch season 1, episode 10, which is a spittlebug's life. But Hymenoptera is an order of insects, and the word Hymenoptera translates loosely as married wing. Ptera, meaning wing, and hymen for the Greek god of marriage. So even though Hymenoptera have 2 sets of wings, the forewing and the hindwing, it looks like it only has 1 set of wings because the forewing and hindwing are married together by a set of hooks. And you can see that particularly well if you look at the wasp in the lower left corner of the picture, that there are larger forewings connected to smaller hindwings. There are over 150,000 living species of Hymenoptera and over 2,000 extinct ones, many of which are parasitic. And the most familiar groups include sawflies, wasps, bees, and ants. Hymenoptera undergo complete metamorphosis, hatching from an egg to an active larval stage, to an inactive pupal stage, to an adult, very similar to the more familiar butterfly, where larval caterpillars hatch from eggs, then go into pupal stage, a larval stage, pupal stage, and then finally emerge as an adult. Female Hymenoptera lay their eggs with an ovipositor attached to the abdomen, and this, as you will see in a few slides, is a very key adaptation in our story. Hymenoptera have well-developed mouth parts for chewing, and sometimes have adaptations for drinking nectar through a proboscis. They have large compound eyes, which you see here kind of wrapping around the antenna, and also typically have 3 simple eyes called ocelli, or ocelli if you're Italian. Seen here is the 3 small kidney-shaped dots between the compound eyes, which if you think about it, gives them 2 anatomically separate and functionally different ways to see the world, which I think would be a pretty cool superpower. The compound eye is a network of thousands of tiny independent units, each with a cornea lens and photoreceptor cells that primarily distinguish brightness and color. It results in poor image resolution, but a very large field of view, the ability to detect fast movement, and often allows the insect to detect light polarization. The ocelli, or simple eyes, usually consist of a lens with photoreceptors, but without a retina. And in the case of Hymenoptera, it's used mainly for light detection and also may play an important role in flight stability. Hymenoptera also exhibit Haplodiploidy, your word of the day, which essentially means that females can either lay fertilized eggs that are diploid, meaning they receive 2 sets of chromosomes, one from the male, one from the female, and fertilized eggs always develop into females. She also has the choice to lay unfertilized eggs, which are haploid, meaning they have only 1 set of chromosomes or half the chromosomes, and those develop into males. Now it's slightly more complicated than what I just described, but an important aspect of haplodiploidy is that females on average have more genes in common with their sisters than they do with their daughters, which likely leads to increased or even extreme cooperation in a hive, or what's known as eusociality. So individuals risk their own lives for the protection of the colony or the hive. And oftentimes this extreme cooperation results in us getting stung. So to review, the order Hymenoptera includes sawflies, wasps, bees, and ants. Now, if you study these photos, there's a key difference between the sawfly on the upper left and the other three groups. The sawfly basically has no waist. It's thick from front to back, whereas the other three groups have what is called a wasp waist, or if you know your leaf anatomy, it's called a petiole, which is this often pretty extreme constriction between the second and third abdominal segments, which to me just looks so unstable, like the back part of that abdomen should just break off. But the thin wasp waist is a characteristic of a clade that includes bees, wasps, and ants. Now, the degree that you see that petiole differs quite a bit. And but so since the sawflies are in a different clade, we'll say goodbye to them. And an even more interesting characteristic of these three remaining groups in the clade Apocrita is that the larval forms of these three groups do not have an anus, so they literally can't poop. And the poop is just stored inside the body for their entire larval stage until the final stage, just before it pupates, when an anus gloriously opens up and they can mercifully take their first big poop of their life. I'm using the term poop because it's fun to say, but if anybody knows the scientific term for insect poop, please feel free to add it to the chat and we'll check in on it later. So now these three remaining groups are broken down into families, and we'll say goodbye to the ants, which are in the family Formicidae, because we mostly know what ants look like. But before we say goodbye to the ants, it's worth noting that ants likely evolved from the mud dauber, which is a type of wasp. And one of the reasons why wasps and ants look so similar, at least when you look at the shape of their bodies. So the ant's closest relative is the mud dauber, and there's a good New York Times article about this relationship, but we'll visit ants again in a future episode. So we're left with two groups now, bees and wasps, our kind of first meaningful distinction. Now, Jennifer has a slide that really goes into the detailed differences between these groups. I'll just kind of give you a general difference. So bees are insects in the family Apidae, which includes bumblebees, honeybees, stingless bees, carpenter bees, orchid bees, cuckoo bees, lots of other kinds of bees. And wasps are in the family Vespidae. One of the key differences between the two has to do with their sting. You've probably heard that stinging bees can usually only sting you once because the stinger is barbed and gets left in your skin, and along with the stinger, it loses some of its entrails, and without those entrails, they can't survive very long. Whereas most stinging wasps can sting you over and over and over again with their smooth stinger. But if you're looking to tell the differences without being stung, in general, bees tend to look fuzzier and plumper with all that hair for collecting pollen, while wasps in general tend to look sleeker with less hair, although they do pollinate, and longer, thinner wings. Bees tend to be a little more direct in their flight because they just need to go from flower to flower, where wasps show a little more maneuverability and sleekness, particularly because they often have to be able to capture insects in mid-flight. So if you're in your backyard and you see one of these, and if you call them bees, you would be correct. The one on the left is a honeybee, and the one on the right is a species of bumblebee, again, all in the family Apidae. If you see what kind of looks like a bee but has that slender, sleek look to it, it is likely a wasp. And the term wasp, as I mentioned, is used for all insects in the Vespidae family. So when I asked earlier if you looked at something and tried to determine if it's a wasp or a yellow jacket or a hornet, it's kind of a trick question because yellow jackets and hornets are types of wasps. So if you see something wasp-like outside and you call it a wasp, you're probably going to be right. Like if you see a big bird with broad wings and you call it a hawk, you'll probably be right. You just, not saying what kind of hawk. Wasps first appeared about 150 million years ago during the Jurassic period, but really became successful around 100 million years ago during the Cretaceous period, when wasps were an apex predator, a top predator, just like a shark in the ocean or a lion in the savannah. And they fed mainly on spiders and insects. At this time, most terrestrial forests were made up of conifers or cone-bearing trees, which use wind for pollination. This is also the time, however, that we see the rise in angiosperms or flowering plants, and they're successful by luring insects in to pollinate them by providing these yummy, nutritious packets of pollen and nectar. So wasps began to add pollen and nectar to their diet, and over the next 100 million years, they switched from being true 100% carnivores to true omnivores. So most wasps today only eat meat when they are young, and as soon as they become adults, they switch to a vegetarian diet of pollen, nectar, tree sap, and other plant materials. So this might lead you to the question, if adult wasps are vegetarian, why are they so interested in my steak or my fish sandwich? It's because, as we'll see later, that these adults are bringing meat back to the colony to feed to their carnivorous young. And this pattern of eating meat when young but switching to a vegetarian diet as an adult is also found in several birds. So young hummingbirds, for example, like wasps, eat primarily insects brought to them by their parents, but then switch to a nectar diet as an adult. So to answer your other question, yes, hummingbirds are technically birds of prey. Today, there are about 30,000 species of wasps, and Jennifer pointed out in some information she gave to me that this is about 10 times the number of bee species. Wasps have advanced neural networks, especially for insects. They're pretty smart, and they can recognize individual wasps in their colony by their facial markings. So all in all, wasps are pretty cool, pretty important, and I'll make the case that we should just leave them alone as much as possible. They're important pollinators, they're important predators on agricultural pests, and they're important for your backyard community too. So unless a nest poses an immediate danger, I encourage you to admire them from afar and just leave them be. If they land on you, they'll fly away soon. If they land on your food, try to move away or offer up a sacrificial piece as a diversion. But having said all this, I recognize the downside of living with wasps in the city. A wasp sting is one of the more painful experiences that Mother Nature can provide. A wasp sting hurts way more than a bee sting, partly because, as I mentioned, a bee stings you once, although the stinger, once inside, you can continue to pump venom, which is why if you do get stung by a bee, you know it's a bee, you should try to get the stinger out as soon as possible. And a credit card scraped across the sting site usually does the trick, although it just adds to the pain. But a wasp can get in multiple stings before you even realize you've been stung. And to truly understand a wasp sting, we need to take a step back again to look at these early wasps and a bit of wasp biology. So one of the characteristics I mentioned of Hymenoptera is that females have an ovipositor, and they use that ovipositor to lay eggs. We also know that a newly hatched wasp larva is going to be hungry for meat. And so the easiest way to have meat available to the larvae is to lay their eggs on their prey directly, so that when the eggs hatch, they have fresh meat to eat. This presents a couple of problems, however. If they lay their eggs on a caterpillar, there's a chance it'll fall off. So to solve this problem, the ovipositor evolved to become sharp so that they could pierce the skin of the caterpillar and then lay their eggs inside or partially inside it. But the second problem with this is that if they kill their prey and then lay the eggs on their victim, necrosis will set in, and by the time the egg hatches, the meat will have gone bad. So wasps have involved an extremely effective, albeit morbid, way around this problem. Ovipositors over time, in addition to becoming piercing, evolve to inject a venom that paralyzes the host animal but doesn't kill it. So then when the young wasp larvae hatch, they can feed on fresh meat, eating their host while they're still alive. It sounds gruesome, and it is like a caterpillar horror movie, but it's an extremely effective method that has contributed to the success of wasps today. So today's wasp ovipositors pull this double duty in both laying eggs and injecting this paralyzing venom. And incidentally, it's this sort of brutal parasitic behavior that caused Darwin to question the existence of an omnipresent and beneficent God, because what kind of God would allow for this behavior? Now, sometimes in your backyard, you might see a wasp with an extremely long ovipositor, longer even than this ichneumon wasp. And you might think, like I did, how can this ovipositor that long possibly function And lucky for all of us, I found this fantastic video that demonstrates wasp parasitism, but also reveals how these particular wasps wield that long ovipositor. So we'll watch this short video together. You may have to adjust your volume.
The wasp's antennae scan every millimeter of bark for a very specific spot. She's found it. Now Megarissa maneuvers her ovipositor into position, but it's much too long. First, it's coiled into a special flexible pouch in her abdomen. Now the drill is at right angles to the wood. She can bore straight through the bark. With high-tech precision, she drills towards the larva of a wood wasp. The Megarissa pierces its body and injects her venom. This won't kill the larva, but paralyzes it forever. She retracts the ovipositor just a little. And then lays an egg directly onto the surface of the immobilized wood wasp larva. Her egg turns into a larva that will eat the paralyzed host bit by bit. Until it's ready to emerge.
I really want to meet the people that compose the background music for those segments. They're just so ominous, and that would be a fun career. So again, we have an ovipositor that evolves to both penetrate skin, and in this case, wood for this wasp, and to inject a paralyzing venom. And the venom pulls a double duty because in addition to paralyzing its hosts, venom can also be used for defense. And one of the reasons wasp venom is so painful is that wasp is trying to make you think that it is way more dangerous than it actually is. Because at face value, wasps are tiny compared to humans or bears. And this wasp is doing everything it can to tell you to leave it alone. So that starts with coloration. And many animals that pack a powerful sting or venom are brightly colored, essentially giving you fair warning that you shouldn't mess with it. This is called aposematic coloration. And when it works, it's a win-win situation. The animal itself doesn't get hurt, and the animal that could really get hurt if it hurt the animal also doesn't get hurt. So they're saying, don't mess with me, and I won't mess with you because it would be bad for both of us. But there are times when a wasp feels it's in danger or that its colony is in danger, and then inevitably a person gets stung. And to appreciate the power of the venom, the great hosts of the Stuff You Should Know podcast broke wasp venom down into its many component parts, and here they are. So first, there are peptides and enzymes, including phospholipase A and B, which essentially breaks down the lipid cell coatings in your bodies, including the cell coatings of neurons, which causes the cells to kind of spill their guts into your bloodstream, and this sends a message of excruciating pain to your brain. That's step one. Second, there's norepinephrine, which temporarily stops the bloodstream in the area around the sting, which essentially causes that excruciating pain to stick around longer than it normally would. So normally the venom would eventually become diluted and dissipate, but that wasp venom says, nope, I'm going to stay here for a while and make your life pretty miserable. Third, there's acetylcholine, which stimulates your pain receptors in a different way than the other peptides. So you're starting to get like, this is a new type of pain I'm going to give you. Fourth, your body on its own produces histamines in reaction to wasp sting. That's what causes that local inflammation. But then the wasp venom is also like, I'm going to also add more histamines to your histamines, just in case your body doesn't notice that. And then the histamines work together to make sure that the swelling gets good and chronic. Fifth, there's hyaluronidase and mast cell degranulating peptides, which essentially melt the connective tissues between cells, allowing the venom to just move freely through that spot. And it squeezes more histamines out of those cells to add a third dose of histamines onto that double dose of histamines. Then we have something called bradykinin, which is associated with chronic pain, because you know that acute pain you're already feeling just isn't enough. So the two kinds of acute pains you're already feeling aren't enough. So let's add some chronic pain to the mix. Then there's a powerful allergen called antigen 5, which we don't know a lot about. And that's probably why they put that number on it, like area 51. And then finally, there's some antimicrobial peptides that the wasp injects to prevent the wasp from getting infected by you when it stings you. And then to add to all that, when you feel one wasp sting, that wasp has likely already stung you at least 10 times in rapid succession. So 100 million years of evolution has perfected this wasp venom cocktail to make you do everything possible not to get stung again. Powerful, powerful stuff. And another interesting fact is that only females have the ability to sting, as they were the ones that have the adapted ovipositors. But in some male wasps, if they feel threatened, they will rear up and present their abdomen as if they had a stinger. And since most animals probably wouldn't know if it was a male or female, they'll just assume that it can sting and we'll leave it alone. So now that we've kind of explored what a wasp is, why it stings us, and why the stings are so incredibly painful, let's take a quick tour of some of the more familiar wasps in our neighborhood, starting with the mud dauber. I mentioned that the mud dauber is the closest living relative to ants, and the mud dauber is a solitary wasp. So you can group wasps into social wasps and solitary wasps. And solitary wasps make their nest all by themselves with no help from anybody else. And you can see in the bottom photo that this wasp has literally chewed up mud and is spitting it out to form its nest. Also, I've seen some of these really bright blue versions of mud daubers in my backyard on native plants. They're just incredible. And you've probably seen mud dauber nests on or near your home, and here are some examples of what they look like. Mud daubers tend not to be aggressive, and stings are pretty rare. So if you have one of these on your house, I encourage you to enjoy it. Another type of wasp you've likely seen are paper wasps, which are social wasps. And they started making paper long before humans, essentially chewing wood into pulp and using the pulp to build the nest to support the hive. And since this is a type of social wasp. And you often see nests on your house in various stages of completion or out on natural vegetation like trees. But the star of our show today is the yellow jacket. And when you refer to a yellow jacket, you are talking about a group of wasps in two genera, in Vespula and Dolichovespula. So I heard from Jennifer that there's about 18 species of wasps in the Midwest. But if you were to be in a place like England or Australia, the yellow jackets would be colloquially known as just wasps. Most yellow jackets are that kind of torpedo shaped and yellow and black, and mercifully species ID can happen through visual markings. And this group of wasps are all social. They also have this characteristic rapid side-to-side motion that you've probably seen when you're outside and your adrenaline's rushing up because one of these is hovering near your food. You've probably seen that kind of characteristic side-to-side motion. Depending primarily on the genus, yellow jackets build nests above ground or below ground. Above ground nests are in trees, shrubs, human structures, and below ground nests are in soil cavities or things like mouse burrows, where they also chew wood fiber into pulp like the paper wasp. And I believe that yellow jackets are the only social wasps with colonies below ground. As is the case with most social wasps, the goal of the colony is to really get the already inseminated queen or queens through the winter, and then come spring, she's going to start an entirely new colony. So kind of the equivalent of an annual plant that has to start over from seed every year. And that's the case for most yellow jackets. Yellow jacket queens find protected places to overwinter, like hollow logs or under bark or in soil cavities, in houses, in the leaf litter. And come spring or early summer, when it's warm enough, she'll emerge and build a small nest starting with about 40 cells, where she lays female eggs, feeds them, and they'll emerge as the first workers to help build a colony. By tending to the next round of eggs, and later workers will expand the nest. They'll forage, they'll defend the colony, they'll care for the queen and larvae. And because larvae are fed meat, while adults eat mainly fruits, nectar, and sap, as the summer goes on and colonies get bigger, more and more yellow jackets are out foraging for food to either eat it themselves or to bring back to the nests. So there's two pretty important things happening at this time. First, yellow jackets are scouring agricultural fields for insects, many of which are considered pests by farmers. So the yellow jackets are helping the farmers out. They're also pollinating. And then another cool thing is that the larvae, after they're fed, secrete a sugary substance for the workers that are taking care of them to eat in a process called trophallaxis, or kind of I'll feed you, you feed me. And as the summer turns to fall, the natural sources of food begin to diminish as insects decline and plants no longer provide the needed materials. And this is when yellow jackets look for new sources of food, which they often find in our backyards, our garbage cans, and our outdoor patio furniture. And that's why yellow jackets become so annoying to us in the late summer and early fall. They're starting to run out of their other food, and they're exploring new food sources. All this time, the queen has been in that nest, that expanding nest, laying eggs until the nest reaches somewhere between 10 and 15,000 cells. And then in late summer, she starts laying these reproductive males and new queens. The males will die soon after mating, and the new queens, which are fertilized by males from other colonies, start to fatten up for winter survival. And then everyone else, including the original queen, eventually leaves the nest to die. The abandoned nest is then no longer needed, as the new queens will build new nests somewhere else next spring. The bald-faced hornet is a type of yellow jacket. So lest there be any confusion, if you look at a bald-faced hornet and you call it a hornet, a yellow jacket, or a wasp, you would be correct in all three scenarios, because the hornet is a type of yellow jacket, which is a type of wasp. I've also seen evidence that says the hornets are paper wasps. It gets muddy, but you get the idea. So essentially you can call this pretty much anything and you'll probably right. Just don't call it a bee. So this is another common social wasp species in cities, and you've likely seen their nests when you're out in parks or forests. They can be fairly aggressive, so you'll probably want to think twice about going near a nest. But if a bald-faced hornet is really a yellow jacket, then what is a hornet? Hornets are wasps in the genus Vespa, closely related to yellow jackets, but they mostly occur in the tropics of Asia. There is a European hornet that is kind of spread across the world as a non-native, including here in the United States, and it's considered a pest. So while my general message is that we should respect wasps and leave them alone, you can go ahead and do what you want with this invasive European hornet, which again are pretty aggressive around their colony and more apt to sting you. So while we do have a native insect that we call a hornet, we really don't have any true native hornets around these parts. And this beautiful creature is a tarantula hawk, not found around here, but I'm including it in this tour because, as you can guess from its name, it stings and paralyzes full-grown tarantulas and then drags them to their nest where it lays its eggs on the paralyzed tarantula. On the Schmidt pain scale, it scores the highest for intense pain with a 4 out of 4. And this is a scale where someone allowed themselves to get stung by most non-lethal creatures, and then they rank their feeling of pain. So the tarantula hawk and I think the bullet ant both get a 4 out of 4 in that Schmidt pain index. And no talk about wasp would be complete without including the murder hornet, which differs from many wasps in that it stays mostly carnivorous throughout their life, and they specialize on attacking honeybee hives and are a huge threat to our honeybees, particularly the European bees that don't have a defense against the onslaught of a murder hornet like their Asian counterparts do. And the Asian counterparts will literally swarm this thing and vibrate their insects to essentially cook it to death. They can provide a lot of heat with their bodies, and that's what the bees that have grown up and evolved around the murder hornet will do. But the European honeybees don't have any defense and are just ripe for slaughter. And you've heard about them in the news. One was intercepted, I think, in the San Francisco airport, a group of them, a package of them. And we've heard about them particularly in the Northwest. But murder hornets aside, there's some statistics. Bees and wasps combined kill only 62 people in the US every year. And again, the folks from the Stuff You Should Know compared this to the number of people who die falling off ladders every year, which is 5 times as high at about 300 per year. So you're 5 times more likely to die falling off a ladder than getting stung by a bee or a wasp. But you can reduce your chance of dying by falling off a ladder by not going on ladders. So that's an easier one to deal with. So wasps, again, are important. When it's possible, just leave them alone. Some added steps you can take if they start to show interest in you. I've heard that wearing white or yellow attracts them. Perfume can attract them. Cover your garbage cans. And if you do have a nest that you need to remove, get professionals to do it, or try to wait until the fall once the temperatures have fallen below 60 degrees, and don't bring that nest in your house right away. And despite all of those websites, mostly from exterminators, that say wasps are not your friends, don't listen to them. Wasps are your friends, and I'll ask them to prove me wrong. I do want to quickly end with another great piece of information I got from Jennifer, which has to do with native landscaping for wasps. So we hear about native landscaping for birds and butterflies. So wasps seem to prefer white or light flowers like mountain mint, boneset, wild quinine, and swamp milkweed. Goldenrod is also a prime flower, and she points out that smaller wasps need smaller flowers, like plants from the carrot, allium, onion, and mint family. So that's what I have to tell you about wasps. Hopefully I have at least paused you to think about them a little bit differently next time you see them.